Okay, welcome back. Unfortunately, I didn't get any video of actually doing the work. So video is a non-video. But I do have some insight to lend, and really the job itself is very intuitive. You actually just need two size wrenches. The nuts are 1 1/8 inches. And the bolt heads are 1 inch. Any of the bolts, like these here, 1 1/8 inches. These guys down here, 1 1/8 inches. So that's really all you need for the removal. I used a 3/4 inch impact and it took them off. You can see the new rubber in there. The radius rod is nice and centered in there. So a couple of notes, and again, you're doing there's 4 rods. There's 2 down lower. Those are identical. I did go ahead and mark them so that I put them back the way they go. There's this one that goes across side to side, and then there's this single one here that goes on the top. So you change them all out. They all use the same bushing, so you're just going to get 8 of the identical bushings. That's the only material you need. So a couple of things. First of all, when you jack up the bus to do this job, you need to make sure that the bus is, the front axle is comfortable, meaning you do not want the bus to be tipping forward, backwards, side to side, whereas there's any kind of a stress on that axle besides going straight up. And the reason is because if this axle is being pulled back a little bit and you undo these bolts, you're going to have trouble getting that radius rod back in place because it'll open up. We actually had that happen. Those bolts are very tight in those bores, so even if it moves 1/4 inch, it's kind of a bitch to get it back together. You know, these guys here going across, that goes on 2 pegs. There's a solid bar that's in there. You know, it's got to be right on, or you're going to be jacking or winching or something. So it's real important to start off with, to make sure that that axle, that your bus is level side to side, front to back. All your chalking is done on the back wheels, and then go ahead and lift up your front wheels. I did use penetrating oil for a couple days beforehand. That's really important. Really the only thing that can happen that would make this job bad is if you break off one of the bolts that go into the blocks, which would be these guys, those down there, this on the other side of here. Those go into blind holes. Unlike these bolts here, which are through bolts, you could always cut those off and replace them. Through bolts there, and then on the other side. But if one of these guys here breaks off, that turns the job into a nightmare. So a lot of penetrating oil, being careful with your impact wrench front to back, kind of loosening the bolts. We were very, very fortunate in that we had no bolts that were stuck. They all came out fairly easily. Once the bolts are out, of course, you'll want to clean the threads. We put anti-seize on the threads going back in. We reused all the bolt hardware. The new bushings come with the lock tabs that will bend over. But that's it. It's really a intuitive job. It comes apart just the way it looks. Once you get the radius rod out, you just use a couple of pry bars to pull out the old bushings. They just pop right out of there. We also used a needle descaler and a wire wheel and cleaned the inside of the radius rods. They'll have some scale and crust in there. But that's it. And do the rods one at a time, again, so that nothing wants to move. So take one off, put the new bushings in it, put it right back on. Also, the most inaccessible one is in here, the one there. Those bolts are a little tough to get to, but they all came out. But obviously you need to be under the bus to get to those. So, you know, what we did was we loosened everything from under the bus and then got out of there, so that when you're actually pulling the rod off of there, it's safety in case something does happen. The other thing is, when you're pushing the bolts out, you can kind of tell if there's a ton of tension on those bolts. That means something's trying to move, so you might want to reevaluate. It is difficult to tell if bolt resistance is due to corrosion or if they're getting pulled on. So if your bolts are all rusty and you're having to hammer out all of them, it's going to be kind of hard to tell. Here, where the bolts weren't real bad, you know, we could tell if a bolt seemed to be under tension, and if so, you know, make sure you're using like a long punch or something like that where you're not underneath the bus in case something bad happens. Obviously, we have the axle is up, have the spacer in here where the bump stop goes, so that's where all the weight is, and then additionally have some safety blocks here in case something were to happen. The bus would rest on those. So, you know, the fact that we didn't actually show any work being done is really not significant. You just pull the bolts out and the rods come off. There's really no, you know, there's no trick to that. When you are putting these bolts here that go into the blocks, are long enough and have enough thread to be able to pull on real nicely. On these guys here with the plates on both sides, the new bushings are actually pretty wide. We did need a C-clamp to pull those plates together to get the nut started, and then use the nut to pull it together. On all of these, make sure that you tighten them up in a nice even pattern so you don't cockeye the plates at all. These bolts get tight against this bracket, so you do those first and then pull the rubber in. Just used a little bit of soap water on the rubber, really not necessary. The book says don't even use water, but we use a light soap water solution, which kind of helped everything. And that's it. If it goes well, we had 2 guys and it was a 2-hour job for all 4 radius rods, so no big deal. If you start breaking bolts off, it'd be an absolute disaster. If I tried this one first because I figured if this would be the easiest bolt to try and get out if it broke, as opposed to this one here or that one in there. If this one had broken off, I probably wouldn't have done the rest of the job because the bushings were not terrible. And if you're breaking off bolts, it's gonna be a small career to get this job done. But in this case, it went great. Really happy I did it. The bushings are $10 each, so that's $80 in material, and it's, you know, once in a lifetime. Won't have to do this again. So anyway, sorry about not showing the actual work, but that's just a couple of the tips. If you follow those, you should have good success and be real happy with the job. Good luck.